Lieutenant Yevgeny Sokolov stands at the third checkpoint with a woman's letter in his gloved hand, the third time he has read it this morning. And he still cannot decide whether the weather here reminds me of our old dacha, is code for reactor temperatures, or simply homesickness. His desk holds 46 more letters waiting review before the daily mail truck departs at 1400 hours. If he flags this one for a second pass, the entire queue slips a day, and delivery times across the region edge upward. Western signals analysts track those delays, mapping Soviet postal routes for gaps that shouldn't exist. Sokolov initials the envelope and places it in the approved stack, accepting the risk that he may have just missed the one sentence that ends the program. In July 1950, Arzamas-16 occupies 90 square kilometers behind 3 checkpoint rings, officially erased from Soviet maps and census records after the NKVD relocated 1,200 families from the original town of Sarov in 1946. The city exists. 83,000 people live, work, and raise children inside the wire. But every official document, every supply manifest, every guard roster lists their location as non-existent. On paper, the physicists building the Soviet hydrogen bomb and the soldiers guarding them are nowhere at all. The city operates under a contradiction. Yuli Karatin's design bureau employs 11,000 people working on the Soviet hydrogen bomb. But requisitions must flow through fake civilian cover organizations in Gorky and Moscow to avoid creating a supply chain signature. Scientists need cutting-edge equipment and constant communication with Moscow physicists. Security demands zero external footprint. Every function that makes a weapons program possible also risks revealing its location. Every week, 4,200 letters arrive or depart. Sokolov's censorship team of 18 officers must read, approve, and forward them without delaying delivery times beyond the regional average of 6 days. Each censor processes 47 letters daily, opening envelopes, scanning for technical keywords, resealing, and logging approval. If delivery slows by even 2 days consistently, Western signals intelligence analysts tracking Soviet postal routing can infer a hidden processing node and triangulate its approximate location. The sensor cannot see the pattern he might be creating until it is too late. Perimeter guard Private Alexei Markov rotates through 3 checkpoints requiring different colored ID cards, but his own papers list his duty station as Gorky Oblast, Unit 11355, a designation that officially does not correspond to any geographic site. He cannot tell his family where he works or what he guards. His tour lasts 3 years without external communication. In 1950 alone, KGB counterintelligence logs 18 cases where Western handlers approached guards' relatives with questions about secret postings near Gorky. A single confirmation would trigger arrest and interrogation of his entire unit. All food, medical supplies, and consumer goods must be requisitioned through fake civilian cover organizations and transported without manifests showing Arzamas-16 as a destination. No supply chain can reference the city's actual population of 83,000. Supply Officer Major Viktor Orlov submits requests under the names of agricultural machinery plants and textile factories that exist only on paper. If he orders too much, regional party officials audit the discrepancy. If he orders too little, shortages cause unrest among scientists critical to weapons production. He walks a line he cannot see. Inside the wire, physicists manually machine uranium tampers and assemble fissile cores using hand tools, standing close enough to see neutron flux on primitive scintillation counters. No remote manipulators exist. Physicist Anatoly Zakharov positions uranium hemispheres by hand, adjusting the reflector distance while watching a single flickering dial. His dosimeter is a film badge, read after exposure, so he estimates real-time dose from nausea onset and skin warmth. The bomb cannot be built at a safe distance. Each system has a failure threshold where the city's existence becomes detectable. Mail delayed by more than 2 days above regional average creates a postal routing signature. Requisitions exceeding baseline civilian demand by 30% trigger party audits. A criticality accident severe enough to require external medical evacuation exposes the facility's function. A guard who names his posting to family risks arrest and interrogation that unravels the perimeter. Crossing any line means program failure, not just individual punishment. The operators have no margin. Stalin's 1949 directive mandates a working hydrogen bomb by 1953, giving Karatan's team 4 years. But they have only fragments: confiscated German centrifuge plans, partial espionage reports from Los Alamos via Klaus Fuchs, and theoretical work by Andrei Zakharov that remains untested. No complete blueprint exists. The team must design, build, and prove a thermonuclear device using incomplete intelligence, limited materials, and no room for failure. A failed test means execution or gulag assignment for senior scientists. The countdown is already running. The team needs to correspond with physicists in Moscow and Leningrad to verify radiation implosion calculations. But each external letter increases the censorship load and the chance of a reviewer missing a security breach. A single letter discussing neutron cross-sections or implosion timing can reveal the program's existence if intercepted, or if a sensor misses the technical significance. Karatan's scientists must choose between speed, consulting the best minds in the Soviet Union, and invisibility. Every question sent outside the wire is a gamble. Orlov must requisition 14 tons of high-purity graphite per month for neutron reflection experiments. But the cover organization's nominal mission, a non-existent agricultural machinery plant, cannot justify that volume without triggering party audits. Graphite has almost no agricultural application. A single large order flags the requisition for review, and reviewers will demand to inspect the plant that does not exist. Orlov's solution is to split the order across 4 front agencies and stagger shipments over 6 weeks, keeping individual orders below audit thresholds. It works, but it triples his paperwork and doubles transport time. Sokolov's sensors face the same math. Processing 4,200 letters weekly with 18 officers means each sensor reads 47 letters per day. Any technical discussion that requires a second review or consultation with a senior officer delays the entire queue. If 1 letter in 10 needs a second pass, processing time doubles, and the backlog grows. Sokolov rations second-pass reviews to fewer than 15% of letters, trusting that keyword flags will catch the most dangerous material. He knows he is gambling, but there is no other way to keep delivery times within regional norms. Guards like Markov are forbidden from telling their own families where they serve, but 3-year tours without explanation create suspicion. Parents ask questions. Siblings wonder why letters arrive postmarked from Gorky, but never mention the city. In 1950 alone, KGB counterintelligence documents 18 cases where Western handlers approached guards' relatives with casual inquiries about secret postings. The handlers do not need confirmation, only patterns. A cluster of silent soldiers, all claiming to serve in Gorky Oblast, Unit 11355, is itself a signature. The silence meant to protect the guards makes them detectable. Zakharov has no remote manipulators. He positions uranium hemispheres by hand, estimating neutron flux from a single scintillation counter, and his own nausea as a secondary dosimetry check. Soviet dosimetry in 1951 relies on film badges read after exposure, accurate only to plus or minus 25%. Real-time flux monitoring does not exist. He adjusts procedures based on symptoms from previous tests: nausea onset, skin warmth, the metallic taste that signals acute exposure. The bomb's design requires iterative testing, and iteration requires repeated exposure. There is no safe way forward, only calculated risk. Every constraint is a trade-off: speed versus secrecy, mission success versus operator survival, program security versus Moscow's demand for results. Karatin cannot slow the test schedule without explaining why to Stalin. Sokolov cannot delay mail without creating the detection signature he was hired to prevent. Orlov cannot requisition openly without exposing the city. Zakharov cannot test safely without equipment that does not exist. The operators make unreviewable decisions every day, and the cost of each decision is invisible until the threshold is crossed. October 1951. Khariton receives orders to accelerate the first full-scale device test to mid-1952, cutting the design timeline by 8 months. Moscow offers no additional staff, no new equipment, only a new deadline. The shortened schedule forces every system to maximum throughput. More experiments mean more radiation exposure. More correspondence with Moscow consultants means more letters for Sokolov's censors. More materials mean larger requisitions for Orlov. The margins that kept the city hidden begin to vanish. The new schedule requires Zakharov's team to conduct 3 criticality experiments per week instead of 1, tripling radiation exposure and the chance of a prompt critical accident. Each experiment brings the fissile core closer to the threshold where neutron multiplication becomes uncontrollable. Zakharov and his colleagues absorb more dose in a month than the previous year's total. Film badges darken faster. Nausea becomes routine. They continue because halting the tests would mean missing the deadline, and missing the deadline is not survivable. Simultaneously, Sakharov's theoretical group in Moscow sends 140 pages of revised calculations that must be reviewed, annotated, and returned within 10 days. The volume would require Sokolov's entire censorship staff for a week, halting all other mail processing. Average delivery times would spike to 12 days, double the regional baseline. Western analysts would notice. Sokolov makes a choice. He assigns only 2 officers to the Sakharov review and waves the remaining correspondence through with cursory checks. He accepts the risk that a security breach will go undetected because the alternative is worse. Orlov's supply audit arrives the same week. A party inspector questions why a machinery plant has requisitioned 220 kilograms of beryllium, a material with no agricultural application. Beryllium is used as a neutron reflector in nuclear weapons. Orlov manufactures a cover story involving experimental alloy research, but the inspector flags the case for follow-up. If the audit proceeds, investigators will demand to inspect the plant that does not exist, and the entire requisition network will unravel, tracing back to Arzamas-16. Orlov has no control over the timeline. On October 18th, Zakharov manually assembles a uranium core for a neutron multiplication test. The scintillation counter spikes to 85% of calculated criticality. He adjusts the reflector position, and the needle climbs to 94%. At 100%, the chain reaction becomes self-sustaining, and neutron flux will kill him in seconds. He should halt the test, but doing so would delay the schedule by 2 weeks. He pulls the reflector hemispheres apart by hand, and the counter drops. His dosimeter reads 340 Roentgens for the session, far above safe limits. That evening, Khariton learns of the near miss, but he does not report it to Moscow. Reporting the incident would require explaining the accelerated test schedule, which itself was a response to pressure Khariton cannot document without admitting the city's infrastructure is overstressed. The secrecy system has inverted. It now hides failures from Soviet leadership as effectively as it hides the program from the West. The operators cannot ask for help without confessing that the system is breaking, and confessing means execution or gulag. By November 1951, every system is operating at or beyond its designed capacity. Sokolov's sensors are 4 days behind. Orlov's audit remains open, with a follow-up inspection pending. Zakharov's team has absorbed radiation doses that will shorten their lives by decades. Markov and his fellow guards rotate through checkpoints under standing orders to report any family contact, knowing that Western handlers are actively recruiting through their relatives. No single failure has occurred, but the margins are gone. The city is one clerical error, one delayed letter, one inspector's visit, one uncontrolled neutron spike away from detection or catastrophe. Western intelligence maps Soviet mail by tracking postmark sequences and delivery times. A letter from Moscow to Gorky should take 4 to 6 days, so any address with consistent 8 to 10 day delivery implies a hidden processing step. Analysts do not need to intercept the letter or know its content. They need only the timing pattern. By aggregating data from thousands of letters over months, they can infer the existence and approximate location of a processing node that does not appear on any map. The signature is statistical, not physical. Sokolov's team must open, read, redact if necessary, reseal, and forward each letter within 36 hours to stay within the noise of normal postal variants. A single day's backlog, repeated over weeks, creates the signature Western analysts are trained to detect. The censors use a two-pass system. Junior officers flag technical keywords like fission, neutron, or yield. Senior officers assess context. But this doubles processing time, so Sokolov rations second-pass reviews to fewer than 15% of letters, gambling that most dangerous material will trigger keyword flags. The system works only if the gamblers win most of the time. Party auditors and Western analysts both track requisition volumes by material type and regional distribution. Beryllium, lithium deuteride, and high-purity graphite have narrow civilian applications, so any order above baseline civilian demand flags as potential weapons work. Orlov's solution, splitting orders across multiple cover organizations, works only if each organization's total annual requisitions stay below audit thresholds. Once total program demand exceeds regional civilian baseline by 30%, the signature becomes unmaskable regardless of how the orders are split. The math is unforgiving. A fissile core becomes prompt critical when the neutron multiplication factor K exceeds 1.0. At K equals 0.94, the reaction is subcritical, but generating intense neutron and gamma flux. Adding a reflector, beryllium or natural uranium, bounces escaping neutrons back into the core, pushing K higher without adding fissile mass. Zakharov's manual assembly procedure requires positioning 2 uranium hemispheres within 2 centimeters while monitoring a single scintillation counter. But neutron flux is not uniform, so the counter reading lags actual core reactivity by 0.3 to 0.8 seconds. Enough time for K to overshoot 1.0 if he closes the gap too quickly. Soviet dosimetry in 1951 relies on film badges read after exposure and pocket ionization chambers, accurate only to plus or minus 25%. Real-time flux monitoring does not exist. Physicists estimate absorbed dose from symptoms: nausea onset, skin erythema, the metallic taste that signals acute exposure. They adjust procedures in subsequent tests based on how sick they became. Zakharov knows that 340 Roentgens is dangerous, but he does not know the precise threshold for lethal exposure, and he cannot measure dose in real time. His body is the only sensor that responds faster than the film badge. Arzamas-16 has 3 rings requiring passes A, B, and C. Perimeter guards hold pass A only and cannot proceed beyond the outer wire. Internal guards hold A plus B and can enter the administrative zone but not the laboratory complex. Lab staff hold A, B, and C, but their passes are individually numbered and logged at each crossing. This layering prevents any single person from seeing the full operational picture. Perimeter guards know the fence line, but not what lies inside. Lab staff know the technical work, but not the external security posture. Even Keraton cannot access KGB checkpoint logs showing how many people enter daily. Each system has a single-point failure mode. 1 uncensored letter discussing neutron cross-sections. 1 audit that traces requisitions back to a plant that does not exist. 1 criticality accident severe enough to require external medical evacuation. 1 guard who names his posting to a family member under Western surveillance. The operators have no visibility into how close they are to that threshold until it is crossed. There is no warning dial, no margin indicator, only the binary outcome: hidden or exposed, success or catastrophe. June 1952, Keraton's team finalizes the device design for the first full-scale test, designated RDS-6S, scheduled for August 12th. Every calculation, every material requisition, every criticality test of the past 3 years converges on this deadline. The device uses a radiation implosion concept tested only in theory, with a lithium deuteride fuel stage compressed by X-rays from a fission primary. The team has 8 weeks to confirm the design works. There is no contingency schedule. Failure means explaining to Moscow why 4 years of work produced nothing. Mail volume spikes to 6,800 letters per week as scientists correspond with Moscow consultants on last-minute design changes. Sokolov sensors fall 4 days behind, pushing average delivery time to 10 days, well above the regional baseline of 6. The backlog is visible in the numbers, and numbers are what Western signals analysts track. Sokolov knows the signature is forming, but clearing the backlog would require halting all new mail for a week, which would create a different anomaly. He chooses to process continuously and hope the surge appears temporary rather than structural. Orlov requisitions 90 tons of high-explosive lenses in a single order, abandoning the split requisition strategy because there is no time to stagger shipments. The lenses must arrive at Semipalatinsk Proving Ground by July 20th to allow assembly and final checks before the August test. The order is flagged immediately by a party auditor in Gorky. Explosive lenses have one application: compressing a fissile core in an implosion-type nuclear weapon. There is no plausible cover story. Orlov waits for the follow-up inspection, knowing it will expose the network he has masked for 2 years. On July 9th, Zakharov conducts a full-core criticality test with a beryllium reflector. The experiment reaches K equals 0.98 before he manually separates the assembly, receiving an estimated 580 Roentgens. That is severe acute radiation exposure, enough to cause bone marrow failure within weeks. Zakharov does not report to the infirmary, because doing so would require a formal incident log that would halt all criticality work pending review. He continues working through nausea and radiation burns, knowing the test schedule cannot slip. Western signals intelligence detects the postal anomaly. CIA analysts note a processing node near Gorky with delivery delays correlated to Soviet weapons test schedules. They cannot pinpoint the city, but they know it exists. The statistical signature Sokolov worked for 2 years to prevent is now in a classified CIA report. The city remains geographically hidden, but its existence is confirmed through the pattern of mail it processes. Invisibility has failed in the dimensions Sokolov controlled. Time. The party auditor in Gorky escalates Orlov's explosive lens requisition to the Central Committee, requesting an inspection of the cover organization's actual facilities. If the inspection proceeds, investigators will find that the agricultural machinery plant does not exist, and the entire requisition network will trace back to Arzamas-16. Orlov has no authority to stop the inspection, and no plausible story that will survive on-site verification. The supply chain secrecy is hours or days from total collapse. Moscow will know the city exists because the audit will reveal it. On August 10, 2 days before the test, KGB counterintelligence arrests a perimeter guard who mentioned his secret posting in a letter to his brother. Interrogation reveals he does not know the city's name or mission, but the breach triggers a full security review. Every guard in his unit is questioned. Every letter sent by unit personnel over the past year is re-examined. The review will take weeks and will generate reports that reach Moscow. The perimeter secrecy has fractured, not through espionage, but through a soldier's loneliness. Every system is now at or past its failure threshold, but the test cannot be delayed. The device is fully assembled at the Semipalatinsk Proving Ground, 400 kilometers southeast of Arzamas-16. Canceling would require explaining to Stalin why a 4-year program failed at the final stage, and that explanation would reveal every hidden failure: the mail backlog, the requisition audit, the guard breach, the criticality near misses. The operators have concealed so much from Moscow that admitting any single failure would expose all of them. The test must proceed because the alternative is worse. August 12, 1952. RDS-6 detonates at Semipalatinsk with a yield of 400 kilotons, the Soviet Union's first hydrogen bomb and the largest man-made explosion to date. The fireball climbs 8 kilometers into the sky. Seismographs in Alaska and Japan record the blast. The test succeeds. The 4-year program built on incomplete intelligence, split requisitions, censored mail, and manual criticality tests delivers a working thermonuclear weapon. The operators survived long enough to see it work. The test succeeds, but the operational cost is immediate. Zakharov dies on September 2nd from radiation-induced aplastic anemia. His bone marrow, destroyed by cumulative neutron exposure, can no longer produce blood cells. His death is classified, and the official cause is listed as heart failure. No public record connects his death to the criticality test that made the bomb possible. He is buried in Sarov under a name that will not appear in any history of the Soviet nuclear program until decades later. The party audit of Orlov's requisition network is quietly closed after the Central Committee confirms the explosives were used in a successful state program. No inspection occurs. No one is punished. Orlov is transferred to another closed city without explanation and without access to the requisition records that would show how close the audit came to exposing Arzamas-16. He will spend the next decade managing supply chains for facilities that officially do not exist, applying the lessons of concealment he learned by trial and near failure. Sokolov's mail backlog is cleared by October, but CIA analysts have already logged the Gorky postal anomaly in a classified report titled Probable Soviet Nuclear Facility, 55.5 degrees north, 43.2 degrees east, within 12 kilometers of Arzamas-16's actual location. The report does not name the city or confirm its function, but it establishes that a hidden processing node exists and that its activity correlates with weapons test schedules. Sokolov's 2-year effort to keep delivery times invisible succeeded, until it didn't. The data is in American files now. Western intelligence knows the city exists, but cannot confirm its function or population. The city remains off public maps and unnamed in Soviet documents until the USSR's dissolution in 1991, when Arzamas-16 is officially redesignated Sarov. For 39 years, the city is a statistical anomaly in CIA files, a coordinate pair without a name, a population without a census entry. The operators succeeded in making 83,000 people geographically invisible, even after Western analysts confirmed the city was there. The operational model becomes standard doctrine for Soviet closed cities. Layered checkpoints, split requisitions, in-stream censorship, acceptance of high personnel radiation exposure, all codified in procedures applied to 10 additional ZATOs, closed administrative territorial formations, by 1960. The lessons are never written as formal success stories, because doing so would require documenting the failures. Zakharov's death, the CIA detection, the audit that nearly unraveled the network. Instead, the procedures are taught as established protocol, origins unacknowledged. Modern Russian nuclear cities: Sarov, Snezhinsk, Zheleznogorsk, still use 3-tier checkpoints and restricted postal service, though satellite imagery has eliminated geographic secrecy. The cities are visible from space, but remain access-controlled. Guards still check passes at concentric rings. Mail is still monitored, though email and encrypted communication have shifted the censorship problem. The physical infrastructure of invisibility persists even after the invisibility itself became obsolete. The Doctrine outlasted the threat it was designed to counter. The lesson encoded in Doctrine: invisibility is not a binary state, but a set of detection thresholds that must be managed daily by operators making unreviewable decisions. The cost of staying below those thresholds is measured in radiation dose, clerical errors, and human lives that officially never existed. Zakharov's death, Sokolov's gamble, Orlov's audit, Markov's silence. Each was a threshold choice made without full information and without the option to reverse course. The operators could not see the margin until it was gone, and by then the only choice was to continue or to fail publicly. Today, Sarov is home to 40,000 people, half the Cold War population. The All-Russian Scientific Research Institute of Experimental Physics still occupies the central complex where Karatan's team designed the first Soviet hydrogen bomb. The perimeter fence remains. Visitors require federal authorization. The Postal Service is still monitored, though the letters are digital now, and the detection threat is cyber rather than statistical. The city that was erased from maps in 1946 has reappeared on them, but it has not opened. The secrecy persists because the work persists, and the work persists because the doctrine proved reliable enough to survive its own near failures. Lieutenant Sokolov retired in 1968, his work unacknowledged outside classified KGB personnel files. Major Orlov managed supply chains for Soviet closed cities until 1975. No record shows he ever spoke of the 1952 audit. Private Markov completed his 3-year tour and returned to civilian life with a pension and no explanation he could give his family. Anatoly Zakharov's name appears on a memorial plaque inside the Sarov research complex, installed in 1993 after the Soviet Union's collapse finally allowed his cause of death to be stated publicly. They were competent operators inside an impossible system, and the system worked because they made it work. One letter, one requisition, one criticality test at a time, until the threshold was crossed or the mission was complete. The Soviet Union built 11 closed nuclear cities between 1946 and 1960. Each required the same daily threshold management: mail timing, supply concealment, checkpoint discipline, radiation exposure. The cumulative cost, measured in radiation-induced cancers, concealed accidents, families who never knew where their relatives worked, remains partially classified. Post-Soviet disclosures have confirmed at least 73 criticality accidents across the closed city system, resulting in 32 deaths. Those are the documented cases. The full count is unknown because the reporting system was designed to hide failures from Moscow as effectively as it hid the cities from the West. The United States operated similar secrecy regimes at Los Alamos, Hanford, and Oak Ridge, though American closed cities never erased themselves from census records or maps. Radiation exposure at Hanford caused at least 49 deaths from acute accidents between 1944 and 1971, with long-term cancer rates still under study. Mail was monitored. Requisitions were concealed under cover projects. The operational problems, how to hide a city-scale industrial effort while meeting production deadlines, were universal. The solutions differed in degree, not in kind. Both superpowers discovered that building the most scrutinized weapon on Earth required making daily, unreviewable choices about who would be exposed, what would be concealed, and which failures could not be reported. The myth. Soviet secrecy relied on brutal enforcement and fear. The reality. It required thousands of invisible logistical decisions: mail timing, food manifests, dosimetry guesses, where a single clerical error could unravel the entire program. The brutality was real, but it was not the mechanism. The mechanism was Sokolov deciding which 15% of letters to review twice. It was Orlov splitting requisitions across 4 fake plants. It was Zakharov estimating dose by nausea. It was Markov standing at a checkpoint guarding a city he could not name. The system held because operators made it hold, not because the consequences of failure were severe, but because the operators were competent under constraints no doctrine anticipated. Was the secrecy necessary? Western intelligence confirmed the city's existence in 1952, but could not locate it precisely until satellite imagery became operational in the 1960s. The geographic invisibility bought the Soviet Union 18 years of protection from precision targeting, enough time to disperse weapons production across multiple sites and harden key facilities. The human cost, Zakharov and dozens like him, the concealed accidents, the families who never knew, was real. Whether the cost was justified depends on whether one believes the Soviet Union would have survived the 1950s without nuclear parity. The operators did not have the luxury of asking that question. They had letters to censor, requisitions to file, cores to assemble, and a city to hide. The necessity was assumed, and the work proceeded. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the archives began to open. Researchers gained access to KGB censorship logs, supply requisition records, criticality accident reports, and checkpoint duty rosters. The city that had been a coordinate pair without a name in CIA files for 40 years became a documented history. Survivors gave interviews. Families learned where their relatives had worked and, in some cases, how they had died. The operational details, the 36-hour mail window, the split requisitions, the manual criticality tests, moved from classified doctrine to historical record. The city's invisibility ended not because the work stopped, but because the state that had demanded invisibility no longer existed. Today, the Sarov Museum of Nuclear Weapons History occupies a building inside the closed city's perimeter. Visitors with federal authorization can see Haraton's original calculation sheets, a replica of the RDS-6's device, and a small exhibit on criticality safety that does not name Zakharov, but describes the manual assembly procedures in clinical detail. The museum is open by appointment only. Photography is restricted. The exhibits explain what was built and when, but they do not dwell on how close the operators came to failure, or how many failures were concealed. The history is public, but the margins of success remain classified. The city displays its triumph and hides its fragility, much as it did in 1952. The operators who made Arzamas-16 possible left no memoirs. Sokolov's censorship decisions are recorded only in daily log totals without individual case details. Orlov's requisition splits are traceable in archive ledgers, but never explained in his own words. Markov's checkpoint duty is a line in the personnel file. Zakharov's criticality work is documented in test protocols that do not mention his nausea or his choice to continue. Their legacy is the system they made work, the procedures that became doctrine, the thresholds they walked without visibility, the mission they completed by making thousands of unreviewable decisions that history cannot reconstruct in full. They were not heroes, only competent operators inside an impossible system. And the system held because they made it hold, one decision at a time, until the bomb worked and the secrecy, briefly, held.